This podcast is brought to you by WealthWave, the How Money Works company, improving the financial literacy of our communities so families can dream again. To learn more, visit wealthwave.com/Austin Hogan.
Hi, my name is Amy Torres, and I am founder and executive director of Paul's Place Support for Families, and you are watching our new podcast, Embracing Adversity. Today we are speaking with Nate Moellering from Fort Wayne Recovery, and he's going to share his story, how he went through his own adversity, how we got through it, and what he's doing now to continue to stay past that adversity. Thank you so much, Nate, for coming in today and chatting with me. I'd love to hear your story. I know I knew a little bit about it, but not all the extra details in it, and I just want to see how people can relate, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to it as after the pandemic.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate, the opportunity to come out here and speak. Like you said, there's a lot of people right now who probably could benefit from hearing my story. Not because it's the greatest story of all time, but because there is some embracing adversity in it and perseverance, right? Which is a very key principle for not just people that suffer from substance use disorder or mental health conditions, but for all of us. This has been something, especially with the pandemic, that we've all had to persevere, right?
Sure.
Kind of buckle down and do what we have to do to get by and help each other along the way. So, I'll jump right in. So,
sure.
I was born here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to, both my parents. They worked full time. I have two sisters, one older, one younger. My family was always kind of very prominent in the area. Everybody knew who they were. There was actually a Moellering Hospital in Fort Wayne for a while, where the Lutheran Foundation is down there on Fairfield. That was Moellering Hospital.
Yes.
So my family was fairly well known for a while here, and my family was very involved on both sides in the church community here, the business community. So everybody knew my parents and grandparents everywhere we would go, and people would say things to me like, I know your grandparents, I know your parents, they're such great people, they're such smart people, they're such kind people, you must be such a nice boy. Well, they kind of put a lot of expectations on me without meaning to early on, and I remember that I always felt like not that person that everybody thought I was, As a person with substance use disorder, a lot of us feel a sense of like we don't belong, right? And it starts at a very early age. A lot of people describe it as feeling like you're an alien that was dropped off from Mars. Now you're here with all these people on Earth, you feel like you don't fit in. So I remember from a very early age feeling like I couldn't relate to other people, especially, when you start school, people are building their social skills, which I have very little problem with now. However, then as a child, when you're struggling with self-confidence and feelings of worthiness, that's a very difficult thing to overcome. So as I got older, I began to notice that people had conversations without thinking about what they're going to say next, right? They didn't think about, when they said something, they didn't think, oh, did that sound stupid? I overthought everything. I was always a very deep thinker. So that's one thing I always struggled with. And then, about 5th grade, I kind of imploded from all the expectations that I felt like people had put on me. And a lot of them were expectations in my own head that I had gathered from people that I had met along the way. And, just because of who my family was, I felt like I could never live up to these things. So I just stopped trying, and I completely gave up, which is the opposite of perseverance. But thankfully, there's more to the story. In about 7th grade is when I started using drugs and alcohol. I was told basically that I had a behavioral issue. I was probably 12 years old in 7th grade. Back then, this was back in the early 2000s. Everybody that had a problem in school was ADHD or some kind of diagnosis.
Give them a pill or something.
There's something wrong with them, So I felt like, so I was being told by the medical community as well as my family, not because they felt that way and they were trying to label me, but because that's what was happening at the time, right? If there's a problem, you give somebody a pill. So I was put on Adderall, which is an amphetamine, which very closely resembles methamphetamine, which a lot of people probably notice listening to this podcast. Methamphetamine, for the most part, everybody knows is bad news, highly addictive. And when you give a child that has an undeveloped brain amphetamines, it can have a certain impact that, people are not necessarily prepared for. Sure. I myself was not prepared. You couple my feelings of unworthiness, self-confidence issues, right? You're already in adolescence. You're already going through those things, whether you have substance use disorder or not. A lot of times with people with substance use disorder, we talk about we were irritable, restless, and discontent. And that's how I felt all the time, right? Like I felt like I was never just okay. So I began to take the Adderall. At first I took it as prescribed, but when I would take one, I was like, wow, I feel pretty good. So even before I knew what I was doing, my thought process was, well, if I take one, 3 must be better. So I would save them up for 3 days, and I would take 3 of them, and I would be like, I feel really good.
Oh my goodness.
And eventually, like, the prescription, it ended up not working out, and but my grades got better, so I was like, well, he must be improving. Well, long story short, they ended up switching me to a different medication, so I just stopped taking it because I didn't like it as much because it wasn't giving me that same feeling. And most people who have ADHD, amphetamines do not do that to them. Like, a lot of people that have ADHD, their brain moves at a slower pace than people like us, right? So when they take something like meth or just amphetamines, it actually speeds up their brain. Well, it slows them down actually a little bit. So they feel tired, whereas somebody who doesn't have ADHD would feel maybe high, or they would have lots of energy. Like, I know people who had ADHD who would do methamphetamine or amphetamines and they could go to sleep, right? Like, they're the people that can drink caffeine all day and just pass out. Feels like it levels them out. I was one of those people. So, I started on that, and then of course that piqued my interest in substances, right? So what I began to do was seek out these substances. So it turned into like staying at friends' house overnight, stealing liquor from their parents' liquor cabinet, stealing wine, beer, whatever it would be, and eventually moved into marijuana, right? So, I got into high school then. I made it through grade school. Like I said, I had mostly given up on myself and on really life at that point, which is a sad thing because you're a kid, right? But my parents, they did their best to kind of stay on top of me and keep me involved in extracurricular activities like sports. Meanwhile, my grades were always very poor, again, because I was afraid to try, I was afraid to fail. So that was always kind of something for me, and I would pretend like I didn't care, but I did very much. So I started to be introduced to other substances. So I was a pretty good football player. I had my first shoulder surgery. I tore my labrum on my left shoulder in the back, a posterior labrum. I tore that when I was a freshman in high school, and then I had a surgery for the first time when I was a sophomore. So I believe I was 16 years old. And that's when I got my first prescription of opioid pain medication known as Percocet. At the time, what was happening, there was a large boom in prescribing because doctors were being told by pharmaceutical companies through studies that these drugs were not as addictive as previous opioids. They had developed these kind of super drugs that could treat pain, and if you had pain, you wouldn't become addicted. They even went as far as to develop something called pseudo-addiction, which is defined as an individual who's on a prescription, say that they're exhibiting addict-like behavior, they're taking their medication not as prescribed, they're running out quickly, they're going into withdrawal, and they're asking for more. That person's not an addict, they're just in pain. You should give them more opioids. So this is kind of what they sold to doctors at the time. So doctors were somewhat unaware of the possible effects of opioids. And again, you're giving this to an individual who doesn't have a fully developed brain, right? Like, no emotional intelligence. The frontal lobe doesn't develop for men until they're about 25. At this point, I'm about 16.
Oh my goodness.
So that's the part of your brain which is decision making, right? Your intellectual things. So my decision making was already flawed, and then you throw substances on top of that. Well, opioids did something different for me than anything else I had ever experienced in my life. I was a high anxiety type person, so opioids are a downer. They depress your central nervous system. So what that does for me is it calms me down, brings me to a level. Also, it releases endorphins in your brain, like dopamine, and it creates a sense of extreme well-being. So people that suffer from substance use disorder generally have some kind of co-occurring mental health disorder, right? And a lot of times what it comes down to is deficiencies in the brain of certain chemicals. So as far as endorphins go, most people that are opioid addicts, their brain doesn't produce endorphins like other people's. So say a normal person's opioid or their endorphin level is here to stay like on normal, like that's how they are every day. They get a spike of dopamine or whatever it may be, whatever endorphin it is. When they eat food, right, when they procreate, it goes up a little bit, but they stay in this pretty normal level, right? Person with substance use disorder, generally, their normal level is down here.
I see.
So it's much lower than the person who usually is not abusing drugs. And that's why people use is because they want to be normal, right?
Normal out there.
Problem is, when you introduce something like Percocet into your system, you don't go here, you go here.
Way up there. Wow.
Right?
Okay.
And then when it comes out of your system, you don't go here, you don't even go to back where you were. You go below that. So that's where the phenomena of craving starts, and that's where addiction comes in, right? Not physical dependence necessarily, but psychological and mental dependence. So somebody that's dopamine deficient for most of their life, you give them a drug that is so powerful that it releases endorphins at a higher rate than any natural occurrence in nature, right, that we could do on our own, they're going to be pulled, there's going to be a pull to that, right? So I remember the first time I took an opiate, it was like a semi-spiritual experience for me, because I thought automatically, this is how I should feel every day for the rest of my life, no matter what it takes, because I finally feel okay. For the first time in my life, I'm not scared to talk to anybody. I feel confident. I feel like I can do anything. I don't feel worthless. You know, like I feel like I think I'm supposed to feel.
Right.
Really, it took me way beyond where I was supposed to be. So that really kind of set me down the path at 16, and I ended up having 2 more shoulder surgeries playing football in high school. So it was a continuous stream of pain medication. And at the time, they were giving out, you know, Percocet, Vicodin, like a 30 to 90 day supply for a tooth being pulled, you know, for a rolled ankle. At the time, you could go into pain management clinics with 2-year-old MRIs and say, hey, my arm hurts. And they'd say, okay, here, what do you want? You know, boom, here, you're good. So we had a huge amount of these pills on the street. So I was getting some of them legitimately, but I was also getting some of them illegally through diversion, right? Because there was a lot of people that figured out, if I go to the doctor and I pretend like I have pain, I can get a bunch of pain pills. Maybe I don't like taking them, but I like selling them.
You can get the money for it.
Right, get the money for it. So you couple that with, you know, kids who are already going through problems, you know, adolescence, it's hard being an adolescent, right? And then you throw in maybe some kind of mental health disorder, like anxiety, depression, right, which is what I suffered from. You've got a recipe for addiction.
Yeah.
So at 16 years old, I already knew that, I knew that I was in trouble. And what I mean by that is I knew that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And most people would say, what do you want to do with your life? I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a father.
Right.
I wanted to be on opiates. That's what I wanted to do with my life because it made so much sense to me in that moment. This was my breakthrough moment. Like I had found my solution. So throughout high school, you know, my grades were poor. They got even worse when I started using drugs, clearly. You know, when I was experimenting with opioids, like, you know, all your Vicodin, your Percocet, also smoking a lot of weed, doing a lot of cocaine, getting into ecstasy, mushrooms, LSD, even inhalants like Whippets, things like that. I mean, I ran the spectrum because in my mind, if I can do one drug that makes me feel good, if I do all the drugs, I'll feel that many times better, you know? Like if I can find something that's just as amazing as this. So I went through my phases of doing opiates, cocaine, ecstasy, and keep in mind, by the time I finished high school, I'm about 18 years old. And I already have a pretty extensive drug history. And when you're using drugs, what it does is it creates neural pathways in the brain, right? So it's just like the analogy I always use, if you walk through your yard to your car the same time or the same spot every day, eventually like the ground is going to come smooth, there's going to be no grass there, and it's going to be easy to walk through. Well, that's the same thing in your brain with your neural pathways when you use drugs or do a certain behavior over and over again. That's why it takes 21 days to build a habit and 28 days to break a habit, right? So you do that every single day. Now all of a sudden you can't do it, and you're like, well, you got to walk through this other spot in your yard. Well, there's rocks there. There's, you know, mounds of dirt. I mean, it's not as comfortable. It's hard. And multiply that out as being someone who's addicted to a substance, right? And that'll come into play down in the rest of the story. So I've created these neural pathways early on. A part in my life that was vital, where you develop you learn a lot about yourself when you're an adolescent and when you're in high school and college, and you develop a lot of your habits and disciplines that set you up for the rest of your life. So while my peers were learning how to time manage and go to bed and do their homework, I was out using drugs, getting in trouble with the police, right? I mean, doing drug deals in the street, stuff like that. So somehow I graduated high school, you know, and I got in trouble many times when I was there for skipping, you know, class to go get high, just not showing up to school. You know, it's hard to function as a human being, like make it to places on time when you're always using drugs, right? Because for every high, there's a low, and there's times I couldn't get drugs, so I just didn't feel good or whatever.
Just didn't do anything.
Yeah, I just wasn't paying attention. You know, by the grace of God, I never hurt anybody in high school or got hurt using drugs and driving and those kinds of things. So I graduated high school. They gave me a diploma. I think they just wanted me out of there, to be completely honest with you. But even then, I started to see cracks in what I was doing. That I was beginning to see that the solution that I had thought I found maybe had some consequences that came along with it. It wasn't maybe just a scot-free thing, you know, where you think you find something and you're just going to get away with it and keep doing it and it's going to be fine. There were some things showing up. Certain people didn't want to be around me already. I was already starting to isolate, things like that. So I got to college, and I got a scholarship to go play football at the University of St. Francis here in Fort Wayne. And I did okay there for a little while, and I actually kind of put my drug history behind me for a short period, and then I hurt my back playing football, so then again came the painkillers and a back surgery. And that's the first time I tried heroin, was in 2013, and that's when they were kind of starting to tighten down on some of the prescription drug prescribing practices, which in theory was a great idea. However, there was a 9-year period where the pharmaceutical companies, doctors, and pharmacies put 100 billion, not 100 million, not 100,000, 100 billion opioids into the hands of Americans over a 9-year period. So they began to crack down, which is great because you want to cut off the pill supply. However, when you've got millions of Americans already addicted, there were 2 pain doctors in Fort Wayne that were busted by Vice Narcotics and the DEA.
Remember that?
Yes. It was estimated that they alone created 10,000 opioid addicts in Fort Wayne.
Wow.
In the city of about 250,000 people. And that's just them, and there were other practices, plenty of other practices here and in small towns, wherever. So you throw that in, and so now you're cracking down on prescribing practices. Well, you've got a population that's already heavily addicted, physically, mentally, emotionally, to opioids. And opioid withdrawal is a very painful process, right? It's like a very bad flu, pretty much fluid coming out of every way you can imagine. Your skin hurts, you feel, you shake, you can't sleep. So opioids provide what's called euphoria, which is a feeling of overwhelming well-being. Well, the flip side of that, for every high, there's a low. So during withdrawal, you go through dysphoria, which is an overwhelming sense of doom and negativity. So not only are you physically sick, but you're mentally in a sick state, and emotionally and spiritually, You feel like you're really never going to be okay while you're going through it. It feels like your life is crumbling, and it is, but it's even worse. And here is the worst part.
Yeah.
The physical part is a walk in the park compared to the mental, psychological, emotional, spiritual part of it. So most people, instead of, you'd say, well, if the pills are going away, they're probably going to stop using. Wasn't the case. Unfortunately, the people who supplied a lot of other drugs in the United States became very intelligent. They're always very intelligent, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, the drug organizations around the world, billions of dollars a year. It's actually moving into the trillions now. Decided to start marketing heroin. Very smart, right? Heroin's an opioid. It's a very powerful opioid. It's probably the most desirable opioid for opioid users because it's a smooth, long-lasting high for the most part. Pretty much every time you do it, you get the same effect. Easy to break down, things like that. It's also fairly easy to make. So that's what they moved to. So that's the time, 2013 is when I started to buy heroin because the pills were getting so expensive. So it started out that the pills were like 50 cents per milligram, which is pretty cheap, and then it ended up being $2 per milligram. So for a 40 milligram Oxycontin, or Opana if you would, I was paying $80. So you have a $10 a day pill habit. That's quite a bit of money, and the lengths you have to go to get that money in every single day is very difficult. So heroin, they were selling it for about $100 a gram. A gram is quite a bit. A tenth of a gram is about a dose. So there's about 10 doses in a gram, right?
Okay.
$100, much cheaper, right? And it's much easier. You can do it intranasally, intravenously. You can smoke it. So it's much more convenient than some of the other things because what the pharmaceutical companies did, they decided to start mixing wax in with their drugs so you couldn't crush them up or chew them up. So they had to be time released, which people didn't, being a good addict that I was, I didn't like that, right? I want to feel good now.
Right.
So I moved to heroin. Meanwhile, I'm still at the University of St. Francis, still playing football. And I was able to get it together for a little bit, off and on while I was there, but I ended up having to leave and go to treatment. That was the first time I went to treatment. Actually, let me back up. Before that, I took a semester off to try to get it together. Okay. Because I knew nothing about addiction or anything like that. Neither did my parents, God bless them. They think their son is in school playing football, and I come to them and I told them, because I was afraid, I said, I am addicted to heroin. And they were very afraid. They didn't know what to do. Because I had crossed over a threshold prior to that semester. I had gone from snorting to shooting, which completely changed the game. So I had started injecting into my veins through a needle, and it became an everyday habit. And then when I tried to quit, I experienced withdrawal for the first time, which at first wasn't as bad as it got eventually. I just couldn't sleep, and I felt kind of crummy. And then I did some more heroin, and I was like, oh, I'm physically dependent now. So I thought that I was going to be able to get off it on my own. I had my parents convinced. Of course, they wouldn't believe me, right? Because you want to believe your kids that they're going to be okay. And I believed it too. Well, I took that semester off. Didn't really get a whole lot of help. Ended up using the whole time. Went back to school. Told my coaches and my parents, like, I'm good. I can play again. Didn't work out. Was still using heroin. Ended up having to quit again. So I've lost my scholarship twice now. And they kept giving it back to me.
Now, quick question.
Yeah.
When you had your first surgery then back in high school, did the doctors and your parents and your family know that you're using drugs?
No, they did not.
They did not. Okay, so that's why they were like, okay, just here, have these pills.
Sure.
They didn't realize that, they're potentially giving
something
addictive to someone who's already a drug user.
100%.
Okay.
And at the time, they weren't thought of as something very addictive, right? Because that's how they were being marketed to doctors, pharmacies, things like that. The pharmaceutical companies did an excellent job. Marketing, right?
Spinning it that way.
Yes.
Right.
They paid for studies is basically what they did through some universities, through some doctors. It was very, very well done on their part. So they had no idea that it was potentially something that would alter my life. How would they know, So yeah, I mean, there was no like, be careful. It was, hey, take it when you need it. Because they were also teaching if you have real pain, you won't become addicted, which we now know is a complete lie.
Yeah.
So now at this point, I lose my scholarship again, and then I go to treatment for the first time, which at the time, the best option was a behavioral health unit in a hospital here locally. And they tapered me off of a medication known as Suboxone Subutex, which is a synthetic opioid, officially called buprenorphine, which is just used to taper somebody comfortably off of harsher opiates like heroin. So I did that, and then I went to a program in Indianapolis, which was it was like a free program.
Okay.
And until I got there, I didn't realize that it was mostly, I didn't really fit in very well. I was 21 years old, and pretty much everybody there was doing like their prison time there. It was a very strict program, and I stuck it out for about 3 months, and then I left. And at that time, my parents held a firm line, and they didn't allow me to come home, so I was homeless in Indianapolis for a period of time.
Wow.
Living in a homeless shelter down there. And obviously the first thing I did when I found out I couldn't come home was go and do heroin. I couldn't put together at that time that this was the reason why. I mean, I knew it, but I couldn't quite understand that this is the reason why all these things are happening to me. Okay. And the reason people say, oh my gosh, why wouldn't your parents let you come home? Well, one thing I didn't talk about was drug addiction is very powerful. And drugs hijack the brain. So while I was living in their house trying to get sober, I did things like steal from them to feed my habit, not because I hate my family or I don't love them, but because I was physically, absolutely. I was physically sick, I was emotionally sick, I was mentally sick. Plus, when you don't have the drug, not only are you going through withdrawal, but your co-occurring mental health disorder, like depression or anxiety, returns, right? But tenfold this time, because remember, the normal endorphin levels here, I started here, drugs took me here and then dropped me past where I was at previously. Right. So that's what happened every time that I would run out of drugs, even though I was trying to stay sober and there were periods of brief sobriety. So when I was in that state, I did almost anything I could to get some drugs back in my system. Because literally what happens is the part of your brain that deals with survival gets hijacked, because that's what releases endorphins, right? So your endorphins are low. So your body's telling you, hey, we need to get this drug or we are going to die. So it literally puts people in, when people are craving, they're literally in flight or fight. Right. Flight or fight. So you'll see if somebody's craving, they'll sweat, their palms get clammy, their hands will shake, and they will become very anxious and very hard to, almost squirrely in a way, and then they start to have ideas that are not usually their own that they would normally have. So that would happen to me often. I'd pawn TVs, I would pawn game systems, family heirlooms, just horrible stuff. Steal from my family. I would steal money out of my mother's purse. I would steal her jewelry, and then eventually, they caught on, so I would steal from other people if I could. I would steal from stores, I would steal from Lowe's, Home Depot, Macy's, whoever I could, right, to feed my habit. So there was a lot that led up to that, and it was honestly a good boundary that they had that said, Nate, you can't come home. So I found myself at 21 years old, living in a homeless shelter with about 200 other men in bunk beds, and that was a very eye-opening experience for me. And I even spent some time kind of out on the streets, and they had, in Indianapolis, they had like a tent city, which is where people live in tents under a bridge. And so I was basically shooting heroin on the streets of Indianapolis under a bridge, you know, when I had been previously, a few months ago, a college football player, right? You know, and that's one of the things about addiction, it doesn't discriminate. And that's what I think people also need to understand, is that no matter what walk of life you're from, and we see it to this day in 2021, we see a high rate of addiction in America. It doesn't matter if you come from a 2-parent family, a 1-parent family, if you're in foster care, it doesn't matter. If your family has lots of money, some money, or no money, you're at risk, and it affects everybody. And people would always say to me, Nate, you don't look like a heroin addict. Well, what does a heroin addict look like?
Right.
You know, people have this idea of somebody with a torn shirt and a beard, and, you know, they're a brown bag, and, you know, they're dirty, and that's not necessarily true, you know? Obviously, at 21, it became true for me. I became that person, wandering the streets of Indianapolis, trying to find money any way I could. And eventually, I was able to convince an old girlfriend to let me come back and live with her in Fort Wayne, which also didn't go well, because I hadn't worked on any of my underlying issues. Right. And that's one thing people will realize too, I hope, watching this, is that with addiction, the use of the substance is just a symptom of what's really going on. You know, people think, well, if you're an alcoholic, you have a problem with alcohol.
Not necessarily.
Alcohol's not helping your problem, but it's not their problem, right? Because you see a lot of people that say, well, why the heck wouldn't you just not do heroin then, Nate? That was stupid. Well, gee, I never thought of that, you know?
Right. A little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and nobody wakes up, and nobody, you know, when they're 5 years old, you ask them what they want to be. Nobody says, I want to be a heroin addict when I grow up, right? Nobody sets out to be a heroin addict. So I moved back to Fort Wayne, 21 years old, kind of working some jobs here and there, hanging out at the bars, which is not good for me because, you know, I have an issue with substances, partying it up. You know, obviously I burned the bridge with the person I was living with very quickly, fell back into drug use again. But before that, I was working at a liquor store, which was a great choice, clearly. And I did some security and bouncing and stuff like that too, which also was not good for me. And one of the coaches from another university that had scouted me in high school walked in the liquor store, and he said, hey, you're so-and-so. I said, yeah. He said, what are you doing now? And I said, well, you're looking at it. And he was like, well, you want to come play football? And I said, sure. So I got offered another scholarship to go play football again. And I took the opportunity, but before I went, I got hooked on heroin again. And I went to rehab again. And I went to rehab multiple times. And I tried everything under the sun, from individual counseling to 12-step meetings to going inpatient. Sometimes I would even get a 72-hour hold put on me, which means that I was a danger to myself or others, and I was legally not allowed to leave the unit. You know, they'd take your shoestrings, your belt, everything, you know. So that happened to me multiple times. And this time I went in, and I got back on the Suboxone, the buprenorphine, to help me taper off. And then I stayed on it. Because it was going to stay on a maintenance dose, which is just, you know, it's basically opioid replacement therapy, also known now as medication-assisted treatment. And it helped me stay stable for a period of time. Needless to say, I went off to college, and it did not go well. I got kicked out of there too, because I couldn't hold it together. I wasn't working on the underlying issues. I still thought if I just didn't do heroin, all my problems would go away, and that's not true. I was drinking, I was abusing my medications, was doing other things. So very quickly I lost another scholarship. It was the third scholarship I had lost. So I came back to Fort Wayne very defeated, and I worked a lot of kind of odds and ends jobs for a long period of time. And then I quit the maintenance medication I was on, and I tried a bunch of other programs in that meantime, right? And then I guess several years later, if you want to move, at the time I had met a girl who I was with, I think, for about 3 years. And God bless her, she went through hell with me. Put her through a lot. And a lot of things about people with substance use disorder and mental health concerns, we're hard to help. Because a lot of times we're fighting the people who are helping us, right? Against them, not on purpose, but because of what's going on with us, we have trouble accepting the help that's being given. So I put her through a lot, you know, and she stuck with me, but Anyway, fast forward a little bit, and I went to a program in Chicago, which is one of the best programs I ever went to. And I stayed up there for, I think, 3 months.
Okay.
And then after the end of that 3-month period, one of my friends, he had an unfortunate accident, and I felt very responsible for it. So I moved back to try to help take care of him, which was a mistake because I was doing very well up there. My plan was to stay up there. So I got back in the same people, places, and things.
Yeah,
which
same
is
environment.
Absolutely environment. So that was very difficult. And as you've kind of learned at this point, I have tried and gotten sober multiple times. Over the course of my journey, I think I got sober probably 20 times, and I went to treatment probably 10 times.
Wow.
And I kept going out and coming back and going out and coming back, and I could never figure out why. And for a long time too, what I always tell people, especially the people I work with, there was a long time where I decided that I was going to quit before I actually was able to quit and stay quit. I would wake up in the morning and say, I'm not going to use heroin today. I'm not going to get drunk. I'm not going to use anything else. And if you hooked me up to a lie detector test, I would have passed. 100% I believed it. But I would end up at the end of the day waking up the next morning having just used.
Right.
And I would say, I don't understand what happened. Well, I used, might as well keep going. Until the house would fall down again, and I'd burn my life to the ground for the 10th time and get sober again and tell everybody I'm never going to do it again.
Right.
Right. So I wore everybody out, right? So I went through this program in Chicago, moved back, had a relapse, awful relapse. Ended up robbing the woman that I was living with, stole money from her. Was just not a good partner to be with. I wasn't healthy myself. And throughout this whole time, I've had run-ins with the law. I've had people come after me for owing them money. Just kind of skated by the skin of my teeth. And also by this time, I had overdosed multiple times. There was one time when I was living in my parents' house, and I was using. I had a job working in a moving company. I was making good money because there was a ton of opportunities to move people in the summer, and they paid tips and everything. So I was probably making, I don't know, $1,500 a week, a lot of money. And that was a trigger for me, right? Anytime I could see a figure of money in my bank account or hold money in my hand, automatically I could calculate what I could buy and how much I could get. It wasn't like I was trying to do that. It was an automatic thing for me. So that's what we call a trigger, which then starts craving, right? So then once you're in the craving, you're shaking, you're in fight or flight, you feel like you have to do it or you're gonna die. And that's what your brain makes you believe. So that happened to me, and I bought some. And this was, I think, around, I want to say 2015, probably. And that's when fentanyl started to be incorporated into things. And fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, which is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. And the reason that they started cutting it into things was because it's synthetic. So you don't need poppies to make it. Heroin, you need poppies. You need people to cut the poppies and harvest the poppies. Turn it into heroin and then transport it, right? Fentanyl, you buy chemicals, you throw it in a vat, you mix it up, and boom, you got it. And it's 100 times more potent than morphine. So they started cutting heroin with that because they said, okay, I have 1 brick of heroin, and I cut it into 4, and only buy a $2,000 kilo of fentanyl, and I can turn my 1 kilo into 4 kilos of heroin, and it's stronger now. So they started doing that. So that's what led to a lot of overdoses and a lot of deaths, and you're seeing this to this day. I mean, 93,000 people, and that's a lowball estimate, died last year of opioid overdoses, and about 80 to 75% had fentanyl in their system. So that's when it started, is 2015. It started before that, but that's really when it hit the Fort Wayne market. So I did what I thought was heroin, and that's all I remember. So apparently I had overdosed, and this was probably, I don't know, I'd been to the hospital multiple times already at this time for multiple things involving drugs and things associated with the lifestyle. So I remember vaguely my dad knocking on my bathroom door, and I didn't respond. I remember him kicking it down. And then I remember him picking me up and carrying me, and he's a big guy like I am. I was going to say, well, must have been a big guy. Yeah, he is, yeah. And they had to put me in the back of his car, and it was very difficult because, I remember I wasn't going to make it. So they had to meet, they were going to Lutheran Hospital, and my parents lived by Foster Park. They had to pull over in Canterbury parking lot, the middle school, so the EMS could meet me there, and the fire truck could start working on me with the EMS people. And my God bless my younger sister, I put her through hell. She was holding my head up so I could breathe, because I was agonal breathing, because I was dying. She was probably 16, 17 years old at the time. So they pull me out, I'm not going to make it, and they have to, give me the stuff to reverse it, Narcan and all that, and then they take me to the hospital. And that's just one example of this happening, and it happened multiple times, and still that wasn't enough for me. So I went to the place in Chicago, came back, relapsed, and like I said, at this time I had had many periods of sobriety, and I kept going back. Mind you, too, I've had a lot of friends die at this point, too, because a lot of my friends that were using, they're passing away from overdoses, suicides, homicides, right? I mean, all that stuff comes into play when you're somebody that's dealing with substance use disorder, because you're not rubbing elbows with the best parts of society. Right. You're putting yourself in a lot of bad situations. So, I relapsed again, and it got really bad because then in 2017, my best friend passed away. And that was very difficult for me. And I felt a lot of responsibility for that for a long time. So then after that, I really launched into using very hard. And it came to accumulation, it all came to a head when I overdosed twice in 24 hours in January of 2017, very close after his death. And the first time I overdosed, I locked myself in the main bathroom in the house, and they had to come in and smash the door and pull me out, and I woke up to them working on me, and then they put me in an ambulance, took me to the hospital. Well, I decided to leave the hospital when I got there and went and bought more drugs. And at that time, I was kicked out of her house, but I went back in the house. I convinced her roommate to let me in, and then I went and locked the bedroom door and did it in there, and overdosed a second time, and then they had to smash that door down to get to me and work on me and wake me up. And I remember they were there, and they were just sitting there, and they were like, "You're not going to make it a third time." And I told them, I said, "That's okay." I said, "Don't come then. Just don't worry about it." I was like, I'm so tired, because at this point I'm living in my car. It's January.
Right.
I had an old Jeep Liberty, and I was basically like living at a McDonald's, with a cracked iPhone because I'd sold my other iPhone for drugs, and trying to get a Wi-Fi signal, and then my gas light was always on because, you run out of gas, like you have $20, what are you gonna do? You're gonna get food because you're starving, you're gonna buy drugs because you're sick, or you're gonna put gas in your car, you're gonna buy drugs.
Right.
So that's what I did. And I was able to scrape up enough money that day to go and get some, and I went, and it was the same drugs my friend died from, right? A lot of my friends had died from the same batch of drugs, but at that point I didn't care. So I overdosed twice in 24 hours, and they were, working on me, and they got me back, and again, I told them I didn't care. And then they had somebody come and talk to me, and he was a narcotics detective, and he'll tell you to this day, his name is Mark Gerardo. We did a story a little while ago, him and I, and he said that he was on his way home, and people were dying right and left at that time, and they still are. And he was tired, he had taken his vest off already, and the call had gone out, individual down. I think it said I'd been down twice, and he was on the phone with his wife talking about dinner, and he's like, "I'm not gonna go to this call, I'm gonna go home, I'm tired." Yeah, and so then he said something, told him to go to the call. So, and he was already past my location. So he turned around, he went, and he walks in the door, and he's like, "Okay, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, you know what I'm doing. I overdosed, I'm a drug addict." And he was like, No, how'd you get here? Tell me your story. So he just sat and listened, and he waited till everybody pretty much left, and he sat with me and he talked with me. And he told me that he believed in me, which was odd, because this man doesn't know me. He's a narcotics detective. But he told me that he thought that I could persevere, and he thought that I could beat this thing, and that I just had to really, ask for help and accept the help, So he was able to get me hooked up with the treatment center. At the time, I went to a treatment center in Florida because there really wasn't much in Northeast Indiana at that time, and everything there was I had already done.
Right.
So I went to Florida, and I went down there, and it was very difficult because I had been doing a lot of drugs, and I had been doing it for an extended period of time, and I had been trying for so long, and I had been failing almost every time. And when we talk about perseverance, a lot of the things that come to mind is trying something that's very difficult and failing many times but not giving up. So the last time I went to treatment, all those things were going through my head. And even the last time I went, I remember I was talking to my dad before I went. And he said, do you think you can do this? And I said, I don't know. He said, do you want to do this? I said, I don't know. Because I had just basically like given up. Like I was ready to die.
You were tired.
I was tired. I was tired of all the death around me. I was tired of, basically I was a prisoner in my own body. You know, there was something that had a hold on me that I couldn't explain. I couldn't beat it. You know, it was always going to be there and I was never going to have a good life. It was never going to be normal. So I just wanted out. But I went. Basically my family kicked me out again, which they should have, and she'd cut off ties with me, and they got me a plane ticket and they drove me to Indy and they said, Nate, the locks are changed. We love you, but if you show up on our property, we're gonna call the police. Here's a plane ticket. We're dropping you off at the airport. There's somebody waiting for you when you get there. I hope you go with them. If you don't, good luck. But there's nothing more we can do for you. And they were right. There's nothing more they could do for me. They had tried letting me live at their house, tried locking me in my room. None of it worked, right? They were tired too. They needed a break, right? So I went down there, and it was a hard detox, terrible detox. And I remember I was laying in the treatment center after my detox, which I wasn't still fully detoxed when I moved over to the residential building. And the flu was going around too, so I was sick, and then I also got the flu, so I was doubly sick. And I remember I laid in that bed for about a week every single day thinking about leaving, but just knowing that if I left that I would die. So I laid in bed most nights and cried, literally cried, you know, and I just asked God to help me. And I prayed the Serenity Prayer, which is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. Just until like I'd fell asleep. And so I said that a bunch of times every night until I fell asleep. And I remember sitting in those groups every single day just feeling like crap. But knowing that if I did what I did before, which is let my feelings rule my life, because addicts and alcoholics, a lot of us were very feelings based, right? Right. I don't feel like being sober today. I don't feel like going to treatment today. I feel like getting high. You know, a lot of us think that we should always feel good. Right. And that's part of the reason we use constantly, is because we think we should always feel good, you know.
Should never feel sad or bad, depressed.
Exactly. Never feel pain, never feel any of that stuff. So that was my philosophy, basically, you know, in life. And I realized that was going to kill me, you know. And a lot of times what we talk about in recovery, and I say to a lot of people, recovery is not for people who want it. It's not for people who need it. It's for people who do it. Right. And that's where the perseverance came in, is that I decided this time that I was going to do everything that I was asked to do. Okay. And I found, and people would say, well, yeah, but you failed so many times. And I used to think that too, but looking back, I don't look at it as failure, because I look at it, I found what wasn't working, right? Like every time that I went through treatment and I relapsed, I still, even if I knew it or not, I still picked up a piece of the puzzle. Okay. So I felt like, honestly, what I did was I picked up all these pieces of the puzzle along the way, and going to that last place where I was so ready, I was able to put that last piece of the puzzle together. Okay. And of course, even then I couldn't make it all make sense, but I had all the pieces. So what I had to do was take a step back and ask the people there to help me take these pieces of the puzzle and put them together. Okay. And learn that these things that I'd been through before that hadn't worked, and all this adversity was actually something to be grateful for. Right. And that it had given me all the tools that I needed, all the strength that I need to do what I had to do then, which was listen to something other than what was going on up here. Okay. Because a lot of people, they give up with these things because they try so hard, and they try many times, and they relapse, and they relapse. And so it's easy to say it's never going to work. Right. You've done it before. It's not working yet. Exactly. It's not working. I keep doing it. What's the point of keeping on? 100%. And there's a statistic that I like to quote. People with addiction and alcoholism, substance use disorder, whatever you want to call it, takes an average of 7 tries to get into sobriety and stay sober long term. Okay. It took me about 20. So for me, then there's probably 2 or 3 people that it takes 1 or 2 times, right? But for every guy that's, because there's a lot of stories out there where people say, I went to my first AA meeting, or I went to treatment center one time, or I found God in church and I never thought about having a drink. That's awesome. But that's not the norm for most of us. Right. And then even after sobriety, one thing we learn is the only thing that we're promised after sobriety, like when we get sober. So sobriety is just the absence of drugs and alcohol in our system. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we're going to recover from a hopeless state of mind or from our character defects or being irritable, restless, and discontent. So then comes in another form of perseverance where we start to work on the things that led us to where we were at.
Got you to that point.
And it's a continuous thing for everybody. I always talk about, the things you hear the most about is like what I was just saying, the Saul to Paul conversion on the road to Damascus, right? Where God appears to you and the scales fall from your eyes and everything's great and everything makes sense finally. For me, that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. And for the people out there who feel the same way, I want them to know it's okay that that's not the case. Mm-hmm. It's okay to struggle and to every day feel like it's a ton of effort, because it is. Mm-hmm. And it's life's one big maintenance job, honestly, And when we work on these things every day, we build new habits and it becomes easier and easier. Mm-hmm. Actually, I don't know if it becomes easier, but I think we become stronger.
Mm-hmm. Becomes a habit.
It does.
Becomes a habit. The maintenance, it becomes a habit.
Yeah, and we become, perseverant, we become resilient. Mm-hmm. And adversity doesn't scare us anymore. And one thing we talk about in recovery is being grateful for all the adversity we face, because look at what we get to do now.
Right.
We've become stronger and we can help others, and we can be grateful that, we can help show other people a way out of where they're at.
Right.
So I want people to take away from this that, things in life are very tough, and we're never promised it's going to be fair.
Right.
We're never promised it's going to be easy, and there's never hardly ever a silver bullet or a magic pill. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's sustained, continuous action, meaningful action.
Right.
And it wasn't until that I took all my thoughts and knowledge and put it into action that it made any difference.
Right.
And people had been telling me that my entire life, but I just wasn't ready to listen until I got to a point where I was. Mm-hmm. And that's to say that not everybody has to go through what I went through to be ready. Mm-hmm. But I just hope that, through my story, people can see that even if you feel hopeless and you're ready to give up, you don't have to. Mm-hmm. And most people that have the principle of perseverance, they've been through some really dark times. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't easy for them either.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've had a very traumatic story then up to this point, in your mid-20s maybe at this point, where you've gone through so many 24, so you're gotten sober, and this was in 2018 now, or are we 17?
Yep.
Okay, so I think when I met you was 2018?
Yep.
So you were just brand new sober, still going through it, just beyond that reach. So that's definitely a testament, because I thought it was years before when we had first met, through Paul's Place in Fort Wayne Recovery. Right. So once you now are past that, you've come back from Florida through the Detox, and you're working. Is this Fort Wayne Recovery your first job after you've gone through Detox, or kind of walk me through that?
No, so I lived in Florida for about 9 months actually, almost. Maybe not quite that long, but I worked down there. So my first job, I went from like Detox and inpatient to basically IOP and sober living, which is intensive outpatient over sober living, basically group therapy, individual therapy with a sober living environment. And I started, actually my first job was bussing tables when I got sober, which wasn't what I was super excited about, but it was a good place to start. Yeah. And it was down in Delray Beach on the avenue down there. And I worked at a Greek restaurant that turned into a club at night. And so they saw me bussing tables, and they were like, hey, you're kind of a big guy, do you want to do security for us on club nights? And I said, sure. So I started doing that too. And then I worked for a moving company while I was down there too, because that's what I knew. I knew bouncing and moving. And then I moved back to Fort Wayne in the fall of 2018. Fall, summer-ish area there, August into September there, and I started doing private security here, and then I was also doing, actually for a while, what's called fugitive recovery agent, which was bounty hunting is the layman's term for it. So I was doing that. So I was collecting bonds and returning people to the jails who had skipped out on their bond. That was kind of like my way of, in my opinion, what I thought was like giving back in almost kind of a form of justice. In a hands-on way. Like I was going after a lot of drug dealers who would skip bond. sex traffickers, things like that, people who are violent offenders too. So I felt like I was doing my due diligence to kind of like right the universe, which was cool for a period of time, but there were a lot of things that weren't cool about it.
I can see where the temptation was there for it.
That, but also, I mean, you just get tired of, getting punched in the head and people pointing guns. It becomes a whole thing. And especially some of the bars I was working at in Fort Wayne were bars that were frequented by a lot of gang members. And that became dangerous in and of itself. You know, you're there to do a job and keep people safe, and they don't always appreciate that, even if you're very polite about it.
Right.
So that came with its own challenges. But honestly, what was cool about that is I made a lot of really great connections with some people in the community, like some of the police officers I worked with, because I had uniformed police officers work with me a lot. And I wasn't a big fan of the police prior to, as most good addicts and alcoholics and people that are on the street are leery of the police. But I got to know some good police officers who work some tough parts of town sometimes and some tough jobs. And also the detective that became a friend of mine as well, interestingly enough. So I made some really good positive connections, and I thought that when they found out that I was a recovering addict, they were going to treat me different, but they actually thought it was pretty cool, and they were like, because we don't see that. They said, we don't see a lot of people do well, so they were very supportive actually, and one of them was in my wedding actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I got married a couple months ago, so he was in my wedding. So anyway, I made some good connections there, but ultimately, I found that wasn't really a sustainable career. I mean, it could be, I suppose, but it's a tough way to make a living. My partner, who was my bounty hunting partner, recently just got out of bounty hunting because it's getting even more dangerous. We bounty hunted a lot in like the Tennessee area, Nashville, Memphis, stuff like that. So I got out of that, and honestly, I was just kind of in between jobs, and then I was working security and bounty hunting, but Mickey, who is one of the co-founders of Fort Wayne, who's from Warsaw, Fort Wayne Recovery, who put me in treatment in Florida, actually. He's the one that sent me to treatment in Florida. Yeah, through Detective Gerardo. He sent me to treatment and called me up one day and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing this, that." And he said, "Why the heck are you doing that stuff?" He's like, "That's not really safe. Do you want to do that forever?" And I was like, "Not really." So he said, "Do you want to work in treatment?" Well, I don't know. I'm only 9 months sober. I don't. What do I have to offer? And he said, "Look, come in and talk to me. We'll see about it." And he hired me, and I started as the center manager, director of operations of Fort Wayne Recovery. And I had no idea what I was doing. It was my first real job. And Fort Wayne Recovery, we stared with basically Paul's Place for housing. We had, I think, two apartments. And we had one house of the Wakefield Drive and an IOP. And, like 5 staff members. So that's where we started. And that was back in March 2018. I think around when we met.
That's when we met.
So I was pretty fresh in my recovery at that point.
Okay. That's awesome, though, that you could still go back into go into the treatment area and still kind of, now you're actually really able to give back on a much better level, I think, than, without putting yourself into that much temptation into those bad areas. And now you're at least in your own territory, your own home area with other people supporting you, saying, okay, just keep along this line here, just helping, guiding you that. And now you're able to show other people too. That's great.
And it strengthened my own recovery too, because what I found was I was giving people a lot of suggestions on what to do with their lives, and I wasn't doing all of them. So I decided that I really better start working on myself. And it actually made me more interested in my own recovery. And as a result, I feel like I've grown on very quickly and beyond what I ever thought I would be, as far as not just career-wise, but as a person. And with my self-awareness and loving myself again, which clearly before I didn't do. And now we have Fort Wayne Recovery, which we had half the building when we started. Now we own the whole building. We own we own all the house. We have 3 apartments and 3 apartments, 3 houses. We're building another house. We have about 50 people on our census at all times at Fort Wayne Recovery, around that. And then we also built the Detox and Residential Center just north of Fort Wayne, which has 27 beds. So we have grown, we've gone beyond doubled.
Beyond
quadrupled, or I don't know.
Well, that's awesome. That's amazing. You guys have been able to do that. I know Mickey wanted a lot more apartments. I'm like, wait, we can't afford that right now. We're still a budding industry. We don't have the big purse, to go along with this. So that's great to see that you guys have done that. And I've seen your name, of course, with Fort Wayne Recovery through the Vital Awards through Macmillan Health Foundation or Macmillan Center.
Yes.
So we've done that. I know we reconnected that on that aspect. So that's great to see that. And I see your posts all over Facebook too, and social media. The Fort Wayne Recovery. You guys are out in the community. You're doing great stuff. So tell me, what do you do now then with Fort Wayne Recovery? Since you're no longer director of operations, right?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm the director of community outreach now.
Okay.
Of Allendale and Fort Wayne Recovery over both facilities. So what I do is I direct our community outreach coordinators, which there are several now that are underneath me, and we put on community events, and we go to events like we were in Van Wert this last weekend for an event for a group in Ohio that serves the families. It's called Families of Addicts, and we put on resource fairs where we bring in, obviously our stuff, but all other providers. And a lot of what we do too is just community involvement. We just want to get out in the community, let people know we're there, and also we're working on breaking a lot of stigma. We want people to know from all backgrounds and walks of life that it's okay to have a problem with drugs and alcohol. And we've also created a primary mental health track too, because that's become something that is really been exploding as far as issues with that, especially with COVID, the lockdowns, and then just there's a general unrest in America and around the world right now anyway, right? With just everything going on.
Everything's happening.
The world's crazy. So it's really important that people take care of their mental health. So we've been really trying to also do that along with the substance use disorder. And like I said, both have accelerated greatly in 2021. And we're really just trying to get the message out about what's going on in the street with the fentanyl. It's killing a lot of people. We continue to set records every single year in Allen County and in the United States as a whole. Like I think I mentioned, 93,000 people, which is a lowball estimate, died in the United States last year of overdoses, and about 70% had fentanyl in their system. Allen County had about 150 people last year, and I think we're going to blow that out of the water in 2021. I mean, we're on pace to probably have about 200 possibly overdose deaths, which is a large number of people. So we're really just trying to educate people, and these are not just people you think of who are already hooked on drugs. I mean, I went to a funeral for a 14-year-old not too long ago. I mean, I've been to funerals for 16-year-olds.
I think I've known a couple, 2 or 3 down the line acquaintances where their son passed away from a fentanyl overdose.
And the part of the problem is too, they're dealing with these fake prescription pills. They're blue little pills with an M on one side and a 30 on the other, and they're presented as Percocet. They also sell fake Xanax and fake Adderall too now, actually, on the street to middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college students. And that's a large percentage of the people dying now is people 21 and under, which is, that's very sad. And a lot of them are just experimental users, as most people were, right, as adolescents.
Sure.
Even one of my friends who was a cop said he smoked weed when he was a kid just because, you're a kid. You think you can't be hurt,
The brain development's not there to make those correct decisions or understand what that decision is going to lead to this and this and this.
Certainly.
Exactly. So.
And it's been normalized by our society to some degree too.
Yeah.
Right? Popping pills and doing drugs, and it's been thought of as cool. So we're just trying to get the word out about that too. We really want people to know that these things are out there and that they're harmful and people are dying. And like I said, we want to remove stigma too. We want people to know that it's okay to come out and say, I have a problem.
Sure. And it's not necessarily people from certain socioeconomic backgrounds either.
No.
It's any walks of life.
Anybody and everybody.
Yeah,
definitely. Old, young, black, white, you name it. Christian, Muslim, Jewish, it doesn't care.
Right.
Rich, middle class, doesn't matter. Everybody's experiencing it. And there's help for everybody out there. And really that's what we try to spread the message of. And, I work for Fort Wayne Recovery in Allendale, but me and my team have a very serious approach about we're recovery advocates. So we don't care if you come to our program or not. We want you plugged in somewhere with some kind of resource, because that's the most important thing. We remember what it was like to be struggling.
Yeah.
So we want to help people persevere, right, and embrace their adversity, which can ultimately be a strength. And we get now every day we get to share with people who are in maybe the worst day of their life that, hey, I've been right where you're at.
Right.
And you can make it through, I promise you.
Right.
You
Or
know?
going through that 7th or 8th time being sober, and
Doubting.
they think, what's the point? And here you've done it 20 times now, and you're advocate for the community. For what's happening. So that's a great story. I love that story. Live your story of how you've just persevered through it all. That, you know, the situation is not necessarily going to be okay right away.
Right.
It's going to take steps to get to it. You know, and I think just when you were talking about you've been through it 20 times, it's like each time you've been through it, you've unlocked another door to get to another part of it. It's like, you know, you're just opening up, and then you get those puzzles together, and now you have them all. And I love that you said, you know, you had, okay, now I need help. Now I'm ready to get the help to say, okay, help me put these pieces together to understand why I'm always doing that, so I don't do that again, or why I can see those red flags and try to go a different way, or understand, no, I need to stay on this path and not necessarily veer from that. So
100%.
Yeah, it's definitely a mental health and the behavioral aspect of it, the drug addiction or the whatever addiction it is.
Right.
It's just a symptom of what's going on. So,
100%.
So
and it's also vital too that people understand that it matters who you put around you. You know, me myself, I have a very close group of people that I confer with on a regular basis about really anything and everything, and who hold me accountable, right? Like, so I'm doing well, but the reason I do well is because I keep people around me that keep continued, I don't want to say pressure, but they encourage me on a regular basis to, and they also call me out if they see me like slipping into a destructive and toxic behavior. Because again, with success and with recovery, anything in life, there's no such thing as arrived. That's what people don't understand. You don't arrive because we see people every day in our lives, right? I remember when I was going through my stuff, I'd see these people who are recovered and I'd be like, man, they got it all together. It must be so easy for them. And then you learn that everybody's working every single day.
Just someone a good day.
Exactly.
And I'm sure you've had your bad days too, your temptations all the time too. It's just a matter of like, okay, now, and this is the story that's going around too, not a story, but the talk now of it's okay to take time away for yourself now. And that's something I really struggle with too. I want to go all the time, 24/7. You know, I have to get things done. If I have 5 minutes here, I've got 2 or 3 emails I can send off. I'm like, I'm always working. I'm like, okay, now I need to make sure to understand I need to take time for myself too, because otherwise my body's going to shut me down, you know, whether I want to or not. And so I'm guessing you probably have that aspect too of going, if I'm having a bad day, I just need to stop.
Yes.
And say, okay, I can't do this today, and this is, I'm going to work on me right now.
Yeah, decompression is super important. And I think, you know, one of the things you're talking about is mindfulness too, like living in the moment and being with the people you love. You know, I think it's easy for people like you and I, you know, we have a lot on our plates and we're trying to help a lot of people. It's important for us to have relationships with those people in our lives, right? Like to take time out to be with our families, but also self-care. You know, like do the things you like to do. Make sure that you take a break and, you know, like mindfulness, just plant your feet and think about where you're at. Feel the ground under your feet, you know, drink some water, meditate, those kinds of things. I mean, those are greatly important things. And it's great that you bring that up because burnout is a real thing. And if we burn out, we can't help anybody, including ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm work on too, to make sure I take that time. So,
and that's another thing, like, you know, people may see what we're talking about and think, well, they sound like they know what everything they're doing, but I mean, we're continual work in progress too, both of us, right? I mean, I'm always reading new books and trying to work on character defects, and that's again why I insulate myself with these people who will tell me when I'm doing something wrong and also help push me to be a better version of myself. We never stop, right? Working on ourselves, you know, and that in and of itself is perseverance, you know?
Well, that's good. Well, thank you so much, Nate, for coming out today and sharing your story with us. Very, very powerful story, and I'm sure there's so many people that can relate to some level or know someone that would need to hear your story. So that's, you know, so much. You know, we've worked together through Fort Wayne Recovery and Paul's Place, and we provided the temporary housing for you guys, and it's a great partnership, and I'm glad to see you guys are going well, just growing by leaps and bounds, and we're there too, so I appreciate your time. And what's the best way to get a hold of you or someone who needs help?
Both of our websites, we have fortwaynerecovery.com, allendale-treatment.com.
Okay.
They can always call my cell number. I can give that to you too. You can put it up with the podcast, so that'd be great. Email, phone number, all that stuff. Anything people need.
Sure. And I know you have lots of ads going on Facebook, so I'm sure someone will see it if they're on social media, which, good and bad thing, but yes, right. Good and bad thing, but you're getting the message out somehow.
Yeah, we have our page that me and one of the community outreach directors run called Bare Knuckle Recovery.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just kind of a free platform we use to get information out to people. Okay. So that we try to record videos about things we would want to hear about when we were going through it, and also for families too. Okay. We want to greatly get them. It's really resource mapping is what it is. Yeah, and information.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today for Embracing Adversity. I'm talking with Nate Moellering with Fortwayne Recovery, going through his story of addiction, countless times of going through sobriety and treatment, and persevering and getting through to a better side of himself and the community. So check back with us in 2 weeks. We will hear another adversity story, and somehow hope we can help someone else out there in the community. In the meantime, check out our webpage, paulsplace.org or fortwaynerecovery.com if you want to learn more or need help with some treatment. Thank you.
In times of financial uncertainty, how can you stay on track? Call someone who's invested in your success. I'm Gwen Rupert, your Fort Wayne Edward Jones financial advisor. At Edward Jones, we believe in building a complete picture of your financial life, including your unique goals and passions, so we can help you work toward achieving what's most important to you. Call me at 260-625-3524 or visit edwardjones.com to get started today.